guys, in today's video I'm going to analyze two different characters from two entirely separate mediums. On one side we have Miriam, one of the main villains in Hunter x Hunter, and on the other side we have Marlo, one of the main antagonists from a show called The Wire. How can I compare two different characters from two entirely different worlds? While Hunter x Hunter and The Wire are two completely different shows, I think there is definitely some overlap between some of the characters, especially between these two, and how much they contrast one another. Each has their own definition of being the king, and as both the characters progress through the story, we see that definition of being a king change in how they value their own names and title of king. Here, we'll look at how they use and interpret their power, how society around them perceives them and their title of king, and how their relationships develop with their loyal servants. Just bear with me because this is a new video concept that I'm trying to do, just bridging the gap between Western and Eastern storytelling. If you guys like it, just please like and subscribe, and let's get into it. To start off, let's look at each character's rise to power. Marlo had to work his way up by being absolutely ruthless to claw his way all the way to the top of the streets. From finessing his competition and killing those that talk shit about him, Marlo literally did everything and anything to gain power, and it worked. Miriam, however, was simply born into this position of absolute power. But the unique thing about him is that even though he was born king, he was also born with the ultimate power befitting of a king, unlike Marlo. Things like strength, intelligence, and loyalty were something that he inherited right at birth, and it's something that is never questioned, only accepted by his servants and even his adversaries. And looking at Marlo, he is nowhere without his ruthlessness and near psychopathic coldness towards the streets. And as you watch these two characters, you realize the circumstances that allowed them to claim the title of king also shaped the way they themselves interpret being the king. Marlo knows that he only got so far because of how cold-hearted and sinister he was. Compromising that method and changing up the way he runs his operation is one of the biggest mistakes he can make. While this means he is bound to his cold-hearted methods, it also means that the only significant threat to his rule is himself. And one way he maintains his rule is by constantly breaking the unwritten rules of the streets, killing anyone that gives even the slightest criticism, torturing people for information, and unlike those before him, caring little about the community he strives off of. Now, for that last point, there is a moment where he gives money to some local kids to buy clothes for the upcoming school year, but in my opinion, I think he did that more to flex his power than to actually help the community he lives in. And by contrast, Miriam, who was born with immense power, doesn't need to prove anything to anyone, and everyone already acknowledges his title as the king. There's never a point in the show where his title is ever questioned, even by those that oppose him. In this case, power is assumed and not earned. And because of this, he doesn't really need to flex his power and show people that he's the man like Marlo does. Miriam assumes that he was born to rule over humanity, so it doesn't really matter what humans think of him. He doesn't feel the need to prove his claim to the title of king. He simply just is. Is Miriam cold-hearted and ruthless? Absolutely. The moment he's born, he kills two of his own kind, then eats them. The difference between him and Marlo in this instance is that Miriam didn't need to act cold to prove his strength, but Marlo has to be relentless in his cruelty because that is the only way to retain his power, at least in his head. And by understanding those power dynamics, I'd also like to bring up the importance of their name, or the perception of their name and how it reflects their title of king. For Marlo, the power that he holds in the street as the kingpin is a direct reflection of his name, and his sole purpose beyond making money is for people to identify him as such. Marlo has to make sure people recognize his name and respect it and his position as the kingpin. Miriam has the title king placed on him by everyone. It is something he accepts, but if you think about it, not something that he decided on his own or he wanted to strive for. It was simply given to him. I think just the way they interpret their own names is quite symbolic of how they rule and comprehend their power. And before I go a little deeper on their names, I would like to talk about the people closest to Marlo and Miriam, their loyal servants. For Miriam, it's his three loyal guards who literally have their loyalty towards the king embedded in their DNA. And Marlo has several loyal subordinates, but the most notable of them are Snoop and Chris. And one of the most glaring things about Marlo and Miriam is that with any loyal follower of the king or kingpin, all of them have their own unique definition of the king. While their definition and loyalty towards the king or kingpin surely comes with a sense of duty and respect, At times, there's no doubt that it can be harmful to the individual inside the king. For Miriam, it was Poof's own idea of the king that shaped the way he served him, and while he did everything for the king, it at times negatively impacted Miriam, the person inside the king. For Marlowe, since he clawed his way to power, his crew treated the name Marlowe as synonymous with Kingpin. However, the most interesting similarity between the two is how their subordinates do everything they can to preserve the sanctity of the title of king, obviously within their own definitions.
Here?
Here's good.
Not in the vacant.
What's the difference?
The difference is my people. They won't know.
Poof constantly tries to disapprove of things that tarnish the king's name and that enable the human side of Miriam. While Chris believes that Marlowe can't be bothered with things and people that are a threat to Marlowe's rule. In the mind of Poof and Chris, whether they consciously admit it or not, they believe they know what's best for their leader. Specifically, let's look at these two scenes to analyze this aspect of their characters just a little more. Just for some context, for those of you that haven't seen The Wire, we have three characters, Chris, Snoop, and Michael. And Michael is revealing to the other two that there's a bounty for Marlowe's head by a thug named Omar, who is literally telling everybody and their mom on the streets to let Marlowe know that he's out for him. What we're looking for is Chris and Snoop's reaction to hearing this news and how they think they know what's best for Marlowe without even consulting him.
Said he gonna get more of our muscle if Marlowe don't come to the street and step to him. Everybody saying Omar's on this warpath. Heard he got a stash house last week. Everybody need to shut the fuck up. Look, I'm just saying, if Marlowe was all that over Junebug calling him a name so that y'all drop June and his whole family, then what the fuck? Omar out here calling them bitches every damn day. Omar! What? What you think we ain't gonna catch this dick sucker? This nigga gonna get got. Y'all gonna tell Marlowe? We tell him, we don't tell him.
Man got enough on his plate.
Youngin' on some different opinion shit, man. I don't know. If I was Marlowe, motherfucker, you ain't.
It's a little hypocritical for them to criticize Michael for giving his own opinion and straight up telling him that he ain't Marlowe, therefore his opinion is valid, but they themselves decide what's best for Marlowe in their own way. In this next scene, Miriam's royal servants find themselves in a similar position to Chris and Snoop, especially Poof. And the thing about Poof is that when Poof notices that Komugi has started to subtly shift the king's behavior, this stirs up a great deal of worry in him. He immediately decides that this girl is too dangerous for the king, it would be best for her to die. Just at the last second, he stops himself, and the reason he did not kill her is very telling of what Poof thinks about his ruler. By admitting that Komugi would remain undefeated in Gungi, resulting in a blemish on the king's record, he also acknowledges the king is the one perfect being that must be preserved as such.
この女危険だ万全の状態の軍議王をねじ伏せ自身の実力を証明するため私が今この娘を始末してしまったら軍議において王は敗北しか残らないではないか
The choice to kill or not kill Komugi is not based around the king's feelings for her, but rather her potential to change the nature of Miriam. The takeaway from these two scenes is that in both cases, the servants of the king are subject to their own biases and oftentimes their ideal versions of the king, which influence the way they make decisions which are supposed to preserve the image of their king. Chris and Snoop can't really be blamed for thinking this way because they have been programmed to take out anyone who disrespects Marlowe's name, even killing an entire family because one person in that family talks shit about Marlowe. These two live in a world where kings are a fragile species, and at a moment's notice they can lose their throne, giving rise to a new era. One can even argue that Marlowe needs people like Chris and Snoop around him, making choices out of his best interest, even if it may seem like they're doing it behind his back. By keeping Omar's threat hidden from him, they very well may have protected him from danger, hence preserving his place at the top of the streets. In contrast to Miriam is a completely different type of ruler. Instead of someone coming and killing Miriam, as the case would be with Marlowe, the biggest threat is a small, frail girl that the king can't beat in a simple board game. The threat to the king is not necessarily something that will end his life, but something that will directly hurt the title of king. This brings me to the importance of their names.
世の名前は何という
恐れながら申し上げます。王は王です。それ以外の何者でもなく、唯一無二の存在。今は様々なまがい者がその名を無断で使っていますが、すべて排除、抹殺いたします。王といえば世界中の誰もがたった一人の存在を思い浮かべるよう。
それはただの前提であろうが、王は称号、称号は所詮冠で名前ではない。
I find it interesting that each guard has their own definition of the king, and while Yuppie and Pizzo give loose answers, it's Poof who provides a subtly ignorant definition. There are no other kings. Anyone else with a title is a phony whose rule would end when Miriam reigned. In a way, this one line foreshadows Poof's antagonism to Miriam, but never at the betrayal of the king. And for a brief moment, Miriam accepts this definition. King is power, the power to crush anything he desires through sheer strength alone. But the thing is, his character evolves from embracing the title of Almighty Ruler, as defined by Poof, to a person happily accepting his humanity and inner weakness, which is reflected by his changing identity, linked to his name. And this is quite different from what we see in The Wire. Due to the fragility of Marlowe's rule, one way to lower the chance of adversaries bringing him down is by making his name synonymous with absolute power. This type of omnipotence is something Poof wishes for the king, and something Chris the Snoop tries to protect. The only difference is that this is never the case. Marlowe is adamant on protecting his name, as to go so far as to kill an entire family simply because one person joked about him being gay. And while Marlowe may not admit it, this is just evidence that his rule is always at threat, and he tries incredibly hard to protect his throne by forcing people to respect his name.
In his mouth, calling for you to step too.
Omar say what? Nothing. Omar tried calling you out by name, but shit, it wasn't nothing.
What he say about me?
Nothing, man. Just talking shit.
He used my name. In the street? Talk, motherfucker.
He just, you know, say that you need to step two in that. I don't know. He just running his mouth, son.
You call me a punk?
It was bullshit, man. You ain't need that on your mind.
What the fuck you know about what I need on my mind, motherfucker? My name was on the street? And we bounce from this shit here, I'm gonna go down in them corners, let them people know. Word did not get back to me. Let them know Marlowe stepped to any motherfucker, Omar, Barksdale, whoever. My name is my name.
After finding out Omar was calling him by name on the streets and there was no direct retaliation by him or his peoples, it was over. Everything he accomplished to solidify his dominance over the streets was all for nothing, to him at least, a clear result of closely associating his name with the title of Kingpin. Miriam is a near omnipotent god who eventually abandoned his title of king to embrace his humanity, while Marlowe did everything he could to ascend to the heights of Miriam by trying to become synonymous with power absolute. One thing that strikes me about the two characters is their desire to alter the power dynamics of the societies that they live in. They see that the current rulers and people in charge are incredibly flawed, and their way of rule is quite antiquated or set up for ruin. I want to bring up Alexander's video about Miriam, in which he describes Miriam as someone with an outside perspective, someone who has a complete nuanced understanding of their own power. And this understanding is the main reason why he's baffled by the deeply flawed power structure that he sees in the world of humans and aims to crumble that type of dynamic completely, seeing that it's illogical and only leads to more ruin. The idea that there are those born into power simply because of their lineage and prestige is completely devoid of any sort of logic, and the only way to break that system down is to show humans the true meaning of strength. Miriam's philosophical foundation is rooted upon his own understanding of power and wishes to change the very definition of it away from traditional monarchy or exploitation or some type of democracy. And in The Wire, it explores the deep human institutions that give rise to power to individuals. Power in a certain institution is only a small cog in that machine, which itself is controlled by so many other things than people. Things like capitalism, police dynamics, homelessness, and even the drug trade are something that people in the city of Baltimore have to navigate through to gain any semblance of power. Like Mario, Marlowe sees the incompetency of the other rulers in his world, quickly dismantling the infrastructure that sustains them and making a power move after power move to solidify his position as the #1 guy the true kingpin of the Baltimore streets. Both characters quite obviously show their disdain for the types of power dynamics in their own societies, and while both wish to change it completely, there is a not so subtle difference between the two. Miriam wants to break down monarchy and any type of rule based on human exploitation or democracy, and wants to change the very fabric of society by making his own definition of power absolute and the only one. Marlo only has the power for temporary change, and it's more than likely his reign would not hold up simply because his domain, quote unquote, his kingdom, is privy to a multitude of forces as mentioned before. Miriam wants to change the world by changing the very definition of power dynamics that humans have created, while it is those very same dynamics that hold Marlo back from sustaining his rule long term. And personally, I think this is the biggest difference between the two characters and how they understand ruling a kingdom and how others perceive their rule. Specifically, I don't think Hunter x Hunter or The Wire are similar shows by any means, and I don't want anyone coming out of this thinking I made some statement about which show is better. I simply made this video because I wanted to bridge the gap a little between anime and Western media, mainly because I think there's a lot of intertext between them with many common philosophies. What did you guys think of the video? It was kind of experimental and I don't really know how well this will turn out. Please leave a comment, tell me what you think about Marlo versus Miriam. Thank you for watching and don't forget to like and subscribe.